In a courtroom buzzing with anticipation, all eyes were fixed on Elon Musk as he took his place at the witness stand. The room was packed, reporters scribbling notes, cameras clicking, and murmurs rippling through the crowd like waves. It wasn't just another legal proceeding. It felt more like a spectacle, a clash of wills between one of the most influential figures in modern history and the forces attempting to silence him. For weeks, lawyers had been working tirelessly to suppress his testimony in a case that had captured national attention. They argued that allowing Musk to speak would create chaos, tilting public opinion unfairly and derailing what they claimed should be an impartial process. But anyone who knew anything about Elon Musk understood one thing. He didn't back down from challenges, no matter how daunting they seemed. The day began with opposing counsel stepping up to present their case for why Musk's involvement should be limited. Their tone was measured but firm, exuding confidence as if victory was already within reach. They cited procedural rules, quoting sections of dense legal texts that few people in the room likely understood. These rules, they explained, existed to ensure fairness and prevent any single individual from overshadowing the proceedings. As they spoke, some spectators nodded along, convinced by the logic being laid out before them. Others exchanged skeptical glances, wondering if this was simply an attempt to muzzle a man whose reputation often preceded him. Either way, the tension in the air grew thicker with every passing minute. Musk sat quietly during these arguments, his expression unreadable. He leaned slightly forward, hands resting casually on the table in front of him. To the untrained eye, he might have appeared disinterested or even bored. But those who paid close attention noticed something different. A flicker of focus in his eyes, the subtle shift in posture when certain points were made. He wasn't just listening, he was analyzing, dissecting every word, every phrase, searching for weaknesses in the argument being built against him. And then, almost imperceptibly, he signaled to his lawyer. A brief nod, a whispered exchange, and suddenly the dynamic shifted. When it came time for Musk's team to respond, the energy in the room changed entirely. Instead of launching into a fiery rebuttal, Musk surprised everyone by taking charge himself. His voice carried authority without needing to raise its volume, commanding immediate attention. What followed was nothing short of extraordinary. Musk began dismantling the very rules that were supposedly designed to keep him out of the spotlight. With remarkable precision, he quoted sections of the same legal documents cited by opposing counsel, turning their own arguments back on them. It quickly became apparent that he hadn't come unprepared. He had studied the system inside and out, learning its intricacies so thoroughly that he could navigate it better than many seasoned attorneys. As Musk continued speaking, his words painted a picture of someone deeply familiar with both the letter and spirit of the law. He pointed out specific clauses that not only allowed him to testify, but also emphasized transparency and accountability within judicial processes. Each point he raised was delivered calmly yet decisively, leaving little room for counter-arguments. Judges exchanged glances, visibly intrigued by the depth of his understanding. Reporters scrambled to capture every detail, sensing that this moment would become the centerpiece of countless news stories in the days to come. Even members of the jury seemed captivated, leaning forward slightly in their seats as though afraid to miss a single syllable. But it wasn't just Musk's command over legal jargon that held the room spellbound. It was his ability to make complex ideas accessible. Despite the technical nature of the discussion, he avoided convoluted language, opting instead for simple explanations that resonated with everyone present. When talking about procedural fairness, for example, he likened it to making sure everyone gets a turn at bat in a game where stakes couldn't be higher. This knack for simplifying complicated concepts made his arguments relatable, bridging the gap between experts and laypeople alike. People found themselves nodding along, whether they fully grasped the legal nuances or not, because Musk had a way of making sense prevail even in the murkiest waters. Meanwhile, the opposing side watched in growing disbelief. Their initial confidence wavered as Musk systematically dismantled each pillar of their argument. Every attempt to regain control only seemed to play into his hands, giving him opportunities to reinforce his stance further. At one point, a senior attorney tried interrupting with a sharp objection, hoping to derail Musk's momentum. But rather than faltering, Musk paused briefly, acknowledged the interruption with polite professionalism, and resumed right where he left off. The smoothness of his delivery made it seem effortless, though anyone paying attention could see the calculated brilliance behind it. By the time Musk concluded his remarks, the atmosphere in the courtroom had transformed completely. What had started as an uphill battle now felt like a masterstroke of strategy. The judges deliberated briefly before granting permission for Musk to proceed with his testimony, citing the compelling reasoning he had presented. Spectators erupted into hushed conversations, marveling at how quickly the tide had turned. Outside the courthouse, crowds gathered around screens broadcasting live updates, eager to catch glimpses of the unfolding drama. Social media platforms lit up with reactions ranging from admiration to disbelief as people tried to process what they had just witnessed. For Elon Musk, however, this was merely the beginning. Having secured the right to testify, he now faced the challenge of addressing the core accusations head-on. The allegations against him weren't trivial. They involved serious claims of misconduct within one of his companies, accusations that could tarnish reputations and shake investor confidence. Yet, as he prepared to step back into the spotlight, there was no trace of hesitation in his demeanor. If anything, he seemed energized, ready to tackle whatever came next with the same determination and clarity that had brought him this far. Little did anyone know, the real show was yet to begin. With the courtroom still buzzing from the earlier exchange, Elon Musk prepared to address the accusations leveled against him. The air was thick with anticipation as he adjusted the microphone in front of him and took a deep breath. For a moment, there was silence, a pause that seemed to stretch endlessly, holding everyone's attention. Then, without hesitation, he began speaking. His voice carried a calm confidence, neither defensive nor aggressive, but firm and deliberate. He started by acknowledging the seriousness of the allegations, making it clear that he understood the gravity of the situation. But instead of diving straight into rebuttals, he chose to set the stage by sharing his perspective on leadership, responsibility, and innovation. Musk explained how his approach to business had always been rooted in pushing boundaries, taking risks others wouldn't dare to take, and striving for outcomes that many considered impossible. He spoke about sleepless nights spent working alongside employees, brainstorming solutions to problems that often felt insurmountable. Building something meaningful doesn't come without challenges, he said, his tone softening slightly. There are moments when you question everything, when the weight of expectations feels unbearable. But what keeps you going is knowing that the work matters, not just for yourself but for the people who believe in what you're trying to achieve. These words weren't crafted to win sympathy. They were an honest reflection of his journey, designed to provide context for the decisions under scrutiny. As he continued, Musk shifted gears, addressing the specific claims made against him. One by one, he tackled each accusation with precision, presenting evidence that contradicted the narrative being spun by opposing counsel. Documents, emails, and financial records were displayed on screens around the courtroom, backing up his statements with hard facts. When questioned about alleged mismanagement, he pointed to the company's track record of success, projects completed on time, revenue growth exceeding projections, and innovations that had reshaped entire industries. If we're talking about performance, he remarked dryly, I think the numbers speak louder than any accusation ever could. But Musk didn't rely solely on data to make his case. He wove personal stories into his testimony, recounting instances where tough decisions had led to breakthroughs. There was the story of a critical product launch delayed by unforeseen technical issues. Instead of panicking, Musk described how he gathered his team, rolled up his sleeves, and worked alongside them day and night until the problem was solved. Another anecdote involved a controversial hiring decision that initially drew criticism, but ultimately proved instrumental in driving the company forward. These tales humanized him, painting a picture of a leader willing to get his hands dirty and make sacrifices for the greater good. Throughout his testimony, Musk maintained an unwavering focus on transparency. He admitted to mistakes along the way, acknowledging areas where things hadn't gone according to plan. However, he framed these missteps not as failures but as learning opportunities, part of the iterative process required to innovate at scale. Nobody gets it right every single time, he admitted candidly. What separates successful ventures from unsuccessful ones isn't perfection, it's resilience. It's the ability to adapt, learn, and keep moving forward. This admission struck a chord with some members of the jury, who exchanged thoughtful glances as if reconsidering preconceived notions. Opposing counsel, however, wasn't ready to concede. As soon as Musk finished his opening remarks, they launched into a cross-examination designed to poke holes in his defense. Questions came rapid fire, probing for inconsistencies or contradictions in his account. Some queries were sharp and accusatory, while others attempted to trap him in vague generalizations. Yet far from rattling him, the onslaught seemed to energize Musk further. Each question gave him another opportunity to reinforce his position, turning their tactics back on them with surgical precision. At one point, a particularly aggressive attorney pressed him on a decision that had resulted in public backlash. "You claim your actions were motivated by long-term goals," the lawyer sneered. "But isn't it true that this move alienated key stakeholders?" Musk paused briefly, then responded with characteristic wit. "Alienation is subjective," he replied smoothly. "What some see as alienation, others see as boldness. History has shown us that progress rarely comes without resistance." The courtroom erupted into quiet laughter, and even the judge couldn't suppress a faint smile. Moments like these underscored Musk's uncanny ability to turn tense situations into opportunities to connect with his audience. Despite the pressure, Musk never lost sight of his overarching goal: to demonstrate that the accusations against him were based on misunderstandings or outright distortions of reality. He methodically dismantled each claim, using logic, evidence, and charisma to sway opinions in his favor. At times, his responses bordered on philosophical, challenging listeners to rethink conventional wisdom about leadership and accountability. Other moments saw him employing humor to diffuse tension, keeping the atmosphere engaging even as the stakes remained high. By the end of the session, it was clear that Musk had achieved something remarkable. Not only had he defended himself against the allegations, but he had also reframed the narrative entirely. Where opponents had sought to portray him as reckless or irresponsible, he emerged as a visionary unafraid to challenge norms and prioritize innovation over comfort. Spectators filed out of the courtroom whispering among themselves, marveling at the spectacle they had just witnessed. Outside, news outlets scrambled to piece together reports capturing the essence of the day's events, knowing full well that Musk's performance would dominate headlines worldwide. Yet despite the apparent momentum in his favor, Musk knew better than to let his guard down. Trials are unpredictable, and the road ahead promised more twists and turns. Still, as he left the courthouse surrounded by cameras and reporters shouting questions, there was a quiet assurance in his demeanor. Whether it was confidence in his own abilities or faith in the truth prevailing, one thing was certain: Elon Musk wasn't done yet. If anything, he seemed more determined than ever to ensure that the final chapter of this saga reflected not just his side of the story, but the larger principles he stood for. The next phase of the trial began with a renewed intensity, as if both sides knew they were entering the most critical stretch of the battle. Elon Musk returned to the witness stand, his demeanor unchanged, calm, composed, and ready to face whatever came his way. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation once again, but this time there was an undercurrent of curiosity. After his earlier performance, everyone wanted to see how he would handle the grueling cross-examination that awaited him. Opposing counsel had spent hours strategizing overnight, determined to regain control of a narrative that seemed to be slipping through their fingers. They approached the podium with a steely resolve, their eyes locked on Musk as though sizing up an opponent in a high-stakes game. The first question came fast and sharp, cutting straight to the heart of one of the most contentious accusations: whether Musk had knowingly misled investors during a pivotal period for the company. "Isn't it true," the attorney began, his tone dripping with accusation, "that you made promises you couldn't possibly keep? That you painted a picture of success when, in reality, the situation was far more precarious. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to Musk, waiting for his response. For a moment he said nothing, letting the weight of the question hang in the air. Then, with a slight nod, he leaned forward and spoke. "Let me clarify something," Musk began, his voice steady and measured. "When I talk about the future, I'm not making empty promises. I'm sharing a vision backed by hard work, innovation, and a relentless pursuit of excellence. Yes, we take risks, but those risks are calculated. Every decision is rooted in data, research, and collaboration with experts who understand the challenges better than anyone else." He paused briefly, allowing his words to sink in before continuing. "To say that I intentionally misled anyone is to misunderstand the very nature of what we do. We're building the future, not just predicting it." His answer didn't stop there. Musk went on to explain the intricacies of the project in question, breaking down complex engineering concepts into simple terms anyone could grasp. He described the milestones achieved, the hurdles overcome, and the moments of doubt that had tested even the most optimistic members of his team. By the time he finished, it was clear that his testimony wasn't just a defense. It was a masterclass in storytelling. He painted a vivid picture of perseverance and ingenuity, transforming what could have been a dry, technical explanation into an inspiring narrative of human achievement. Opposing counsel, however, wasn't about to let him dominate the conversation so easily. They doubled down, firing off another round of questions aimed at exposing inconsistencies in his account. One particularly pointed query focused on a controversial email exchange between Musk and senior executives, which the prosecution claimed revealed a deliberate attempt to downplay risks. "Can you explain this message?" the lawyer demanded, holding up a printed copy of the email for emphasis. "It seems to suggest that you were aware of potential failures but chose not to disclose them publicly." Musk glanced at the document, then looked directly at the jury. "What you're referring to is part of an internal discussion, a brainstorming session where we explored every possible scenario, good or bad. In any innovative endeavor, you have to consider worst-case outcomes. That doesn't mean you expect them to happen. It means you're preparing for them. Transparency within our team is crucial because it allows us to address problems before they become issues." His explanation was delivered with such clarity and conviction that some jurors nodded subtly, as if agreeing with his logic. As the questioning continued, Musk's ability to stay calm under pressure became increasingly apparent. No matter how aggressive or combative the opposing attorneys became, he never lost his composure. Instead, he used their tactics to his advantage, turning each confrontation into an opportunity to reinforce his points. When asked why he hadn't disclosed certain financial details to shareholders sooner, he responded with a mix of pragmatism and wit. "Would you rather I shared raw numbers without context, creating confusion, or wait until we had a complete understanding of the situation so we could provide meaningful insights?" The rhetorical question drew murmurs of agreement from parts of the audience, further shifting the tide in his favor. At one point, the tension in the room reached a boiling point. An attorney, visibly frustrated by Musk's evasive yet effective responses, raised his voice slightly, accusing him of dodging direct answers. "You're dancing around the truth," the lawyer snapped, pointing an accusatory finger. The courtroom froze, unsure of how Musk would react. But instead of rising to the bait, he smiled faintly, his expression almost amused. "I'm not dancing," he replied coolly. "I'm simply ensuring that my answers are accurate and relevant. If you want sound bites, I suggest watching TV dramas. This is real life, and real life requires nuance." The comment elicited soft chuckles from several corners of the room, including a barely audible laugh from one of the judges. It was a subtle reminder of Musk's unique ability to connect with people, even in the most adversarial settings. Rather than alienating the jury with arrogance, his confidence and humor made him relatable, almost endearing. Spectators exchanged glances, whispering comments like, "He's good," and "They can't rattle him." By the time the session concluded, it was evident that Musk had passed yet another test with flying colors. Not only had he defended himself against every accusation thrown his way, But he had also managed to reframe the entire case in his favor. Where opponents had hoped to portray him as reckless or deceptive, he emerged as a thoughtful leader, driven by a desire to push boundaries and create lasting impact. Outside the courthouse, reporters scrambled to capture reactions from attendees, many of whom praised Musk's poise and intelligence. Social media exploded with memes and posts celebrating his performance, turning what might have been a legal headache into a public relations triumph. Yet, despite the growing momentum, Musk remained grounded. As he stepped out of the courthouse surrounded by flashing cameras and shouted questions, he offered only a brief smile and a wave before disappearing into his car. Those close to him knew that while the day had gone well, the fight was far from over. Trials are unpredictable and the opposition still had cards to play. But for now, Musk allowed himself a small moment of satisfaction, knowing he had turned adversity into opportunity once again. Back inside the courtroom, preparations for the next phase were already underway. Lawyers huddled together, reviewing notes and strategized for the days ahead. Judges conferred quietly, weighing the implications of what they had witnessed. And somewhere in the mix, Elon Musk stood tall, not just as a defendant fighting for vindication, but as a symbol of resilience and determination. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain: he wasn't going down without a fight. The fourth day of the trial began with a palpable shift in energy. The courtroom, once filled with skepticism and tension, now carried an air of cautious curiosity. People were no longer just watching Elon Musk, they were studying him, trying to understand how one man could so effortlessly command both respect and intrigue. Reporters jotted down notes furiously, cameras zoomed in on every expression, and even seasoned attorneys found themselves leaning forward in anticipation. It wasn't just about the case anymore, it was about witnessing something extraordinary unfold before their eyes. As Musk took his seat at the witness stand, the opposing counsel stood up, ready to resume their cross-examination. This time, however, they came prepared with a new strategy. Instead of bombarding him with rapid-fire questions, they slowed down, adopting a more deliberate approach. Their first question seemed harmless enough. "Mr. Musk, can you tell us what motivates you to take such bold risks in your ventures?" On the surface, it appeared to be an open-ended inquiry, but those familiar with courtroom tactics recognized it for what it was: an attempt to lure him into revealing vulnerabilities or contradictions. Musk didn't hesitate. He leaned slightly forward, his hands resting lightly on the edge of the table, and smiled faintly. "What motivates me," he began, choosing his words carefully, "is the belief that we can build a better future, not just for ourselves, but for generations to come. Every risk I take is calculated, not reckless, and rooted in solving real-world problems." His voice carried a quiet passion, as though he were speaking not just to the jury but to anyone who had ever doubted the value of dreaming big. The attorney nodded slowly, pretending to absorb his answer, then pivoted unexpectedly. "But isn't it true that some of these calculated risks have resulted in significant setbacks? For instance, there was the incident with Specific Project, which led to widespread criticism." The mention of this particular event caused a ripple of murmurs in the room. It was a sensitive topic, one that had been scrutinized heavily in the media. Musk's critics often pointed to it as evidence of mismanagement, while his supporters argued it was simply part of the innovation process. Rather than avoiding the subject, Musk embraced it. "Yes, that incident happened," he admitted without hesitation. "And yes, it was challenging. But let me ask you this. When has progress ever been achieved without challenges? Think about the history of aviation, space exploration, or any major technological leap. Failure is inevitable. It's how you respond to failure that defines success." He went on to describe the lessons learned from that experience, detailing the steps taken to prevent similar issues in the future. What could have been a damaging admission instead became a testament to resilience and adaptability. Sensing an opening, opposing counsel pressed harder. They presented a series of documents, emails, financial reports, internal memos, all intended to cast doubt on Musk's decision-making during critical moments. One document in particular caught the attention of everyone in the room. A memo outlining potential cost overruns for a high-profile initiative. This shows that you were aware of budget concerns yet continued moving forward, the lawyer said triumphantly. Isn't that irresponsible? For a moment, Musk studied the document silently. Then, with a calmness that belied the stakes, he responded. Awareness of challenges is not the same as irresponsibility. In fact, ignoring those challenges would be far worse. Look closer at the memo. You'll see that it includes multiple contingency plans and solutions proposed by our team. We didn't ignore the risks. We addressed them head-on. To drive his point home, he asked if the document could be displayed on the courtroom screens. As key sections were highlighted, spectators could clearly see the meticulous planning and problem-solving embedded within the text. Despite his composure, the pressure mounted as the hours ticked by. Opposing counsel grew increasingly frustrated, their questions becoming sharper and more personal. At one point, they accused Musk of prioritizing his own ambitions over the well-being of employees and stakeholders. Do you deny that your relentless pursuit of innovation has sometimes come at the expense of others? The lawyer demanded, his tone accusatory. Musk paused, his expression thoughtful. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a rare note of vulnerability. I won't deny that the work we do is demanding. Building rockets, advancing renewable energy, developing AI, it's not easy. And yes, there are sacrifices along the way. But I believe deeply in the mission, and I know I'm not alone in that belief. The people I work with share the same vision, the same drive to make a difference. Together we push through obstacles because we know the end goal is worth it. His words resonated throughout the courtroom. Some jurors exchanged glances, nodding, almost imperceptibly. Even a few members of the audience whispered approvingly, moved by the sincerity in his tone. Musk wasn't denying the difficulties. He was acknowledging them, framing them as necessary steps on the path to greatness. As the afternoon wore on, the opposing side tried one last gambit, questioning Musk's leadership style. They painted a picture of a micromanager obsessed with control, someone whose hands-on approach stifled creativity and alienated colleagues. How do you respond to claims that your management methods create a toxic environment? The attorney asked, his tone dripping with accusation. Musk chuckled softly, shaking his head. Toxic environments thrive on secrecy and fear. My approach is the opposite. I encourage transparency, collaboration, and accountability. Yes, I expect excellence from myself and my teams, but that's because I believe in their potential. If anything, my involvement ensures that problems are solved quickly and effectively, he added with a wry smile. Besides, anyone who's worked closely with me knows I'm more likely to roll up my sleeves and join the effort than sit back and criticize. By the end of the day, it was clear that Musk had weathered another storm. Despite the relentless barrage of questions, he had managed to maintain control of the narrative, turning each challenge into an opportunity to reinforce his values and vision. Outside the courthouse, crowds gathered once again, eager to hear snippets of testimony and speculate about the outcome. Social media erupted with reactions, ranging from admiration for Musk's poise to frustration over what some viewed as unfair scrutiny. Inside, however, the mood was quieter. Judges reviewed notes, lawyers strategized behind closed doors, and jurors reflected on the day's events. For Elon Musk, the battle was far from over, but he allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction. Each day brought new tests, new opportunities, to prove not only his innocence but also the integrity of his mission. Whatever lay ahead, he knew one thing for certain: he wouldn't back down, not now, not ever. The fifth day of the trial dawned with a sense of inevitability hanging over the courtroom. The air felt heavier, as if everyone knew they were approaching the climax of this legal drama. Reporters arrived earlier than usual, setting up their equipment and jockeying for the best positions to capture every detail. Spectators filed in quietly, whispering among themselves about what might unfold next. Elon Musk, ever composed, entered the room with his characteristic calmness. But even he seemed to carry an extra weight today, a subtle tension in his posture that hinted at the importance of what lay ahead. As proceedings began, opposing counsel launched into their final push, determined to leave no stone unturned. They had saved some of their most pointed questions for this stage, hoping to land a decisive blow. Their first question was designed to strike at the heart of Musk's credibility. "Mr. Musk," the lead attorney began, his voice steady but laced with accusation, "you've spoken often about your commitment to transparency and accountability. Yet there are allegations that you withheld critical information from regulators during key moments. How do you respond to that?" Musk didn't flinch. He took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the room briefly before settling on the jury. "Let me be clear," he said, his tone firm but measured. "Transparency doesn't mean flooding people with raw data or incomplete updates. It means providing meaningful, actionable insights when the time is right. Decisions aren't made in isolation. They're based on thorough analysis and collaboration. I've always prioritized giving stakeholders the full picture, not partial snapshots that could lead to misunderstandings." His response drew murmurs from the audience, some approving, others skeptical. Opposing counsel seized on this reaction, pressing further. "But isn't it true that delays in reporting certain issues gave the impression of concealment rather than clarity?" The lawyer's tone sharpened, aiming to cast doubt on Musk's intentions. Musk leaned back slightly in his chair, considering the question. When he spoke, his words carried a mix of patience and resolve. "Delays happen because solving complex problems takes time. Imagine rushing out half-baked solutions just to meet arbitrary deadlines. It would do more harm than good. Every step we take is guided by ensuring accuracy and fairness. If anything, my focus has always been on protecting long-term interests over short-term optics." The exchange continued, with each question probing deeper into Musk's decision-making process. At one point, the opposing side presented a timeline of events, highlighting instances where they claimed Musk's actions, or lack thereof, had exacerbated crises. The document was displayed on screens around the courtroom, drawing gasps from parts of the audience. For a moment, it seemed like the prosecution might have finally found a chink in Musk's armor. But Musk wasn't fazed. Instead of disputing the timeline outright, he used it as an opportunity to reframe the narrative. "This timeline shows challenges, yes, but it also shows how we addressed them," he explained, pointing to specific entries. Each issue was met with immediate action, whether it involved reallocating resources, revising strategies, or communicating openly with affected parties. What looks like delay on paper is actually careful planning and practice. His ability to turn potential weaknesses into strengths became increasingly apparent as the day wore on. Opposing counsel grew visibly frustrated, their earlier confidence wavering under Musk's relentless logic. One particularly heated moment came when the attorney accused him of putting personal ambition above ethical considerations. "You talk about innovation and progress," the lawyer snapped, "but at what cost? Isn't it true that your drive for success has sometimes overshadowed basic principles of fairness?" Musk paused, his expression thoughtful. Then, with quiet conviction, he replied, "Success without ethics is hollow. I've built my career on challenging norms, yes, but never at the expense of integrity. Innovation requires boldness, but it also demands responsibility. Every decision I make is weighed against its impact, not just on profits, but on people and the planet." The courtroom fell silent after those words, the gravity of his statement sinking in. Even the judge seemed momentarily taken aback, jotting down notes with unusual intensity. Jurors exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable but undeniably engaged. Outside, reporters watching live feeds scrambled to capture the essence of Musk's defense, knowing it would dominate headlines for days to come. Yet despite these victories, the opposition refused to relent. As the afternoon session began, they shifted tactics once again, focusing on Musk's public persona. They argued that his larger-than-life image often overshadowed the realities of his businesses, creating unrealistic expectations among investors and employees alike. "Isn't it fair to say," the attorney asked, "that your constant presence in the media distracts from the actual work being done?" Musk chuckled softly, shaking his head. Being visible isn't about distraction, it's about inspiration. People look to leaders for guidance, especially during uncertain times. If sharing my vision encourages others to dream bigger and aim higher, then I consider that a responsibility, not a liability. His answer resonated with many in the room, who nodded approvingly or scribbled notes furiously. By the end of the day, it was clear that Musk had weathered yet another storm. Each accusation had been met with precision and poise, turning what could have been damning evidence into opportunities for reflection and reinforcement. Outside the courthouse, crowds gathered once again, eager to hear first-hand accounts of the day's events. Social media buzzed with reactions, ranging from praise for Musk's resilience to debates about the broader implications of the case. Inside, however, the atmosphere remained subdued. Judges conferred quietly. Lawyers huddled together reviewing notes, and jurors sat pensively, absorbing the weight of the testimony they'd heard. For Elon Musk, the battle was nearing its conclusion, but he allowed himself only a fleeting sense of accomplishment. Tomorrow would bring closing arguments, the final chapter in this high-stakes saga. Whatever the outcome, one thing was certain. He had fought not just to defend himself but to uphold the values that defined him. And in doing so, he had transformed a courtroom trial into something far greater, a testament to the power of perseverance, integrity, and unwavering belief in the future. The sixth and final day of the trial arrived, carrying with it a mix of anticipation and uncertainty. The courtroom was packed to capacity, with every seat occupied and some spectators standing along the walls just to catch a glimpse of what promised to be a dramatic conclusion. Reporters adjusted their cameras, lawyers shuffled through stacks of papers, and jurors sat upright, their faces revealing little but their eyes betraying the weight of the decision they would soon have to make. Elon Musk entered the room as he had each day before, calm, composed, and focused. But there was an undeniable intensity in his demeanor, as if he could feel the enormity of this moment pressing down on him. Closing arguments began with opposing counsel, taking the floor. First, they wasted no time launching into a passionate summary of their case, painting a picture of a man whose ambition had spiraled out of control. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," the lead attorney began, pacing slowly in front of them. "What we've seen here is not just a story about business decisions or financial missteps. It's about accountability, or rather, the lack of it. Mr. Musk has admitted to risks, delays, and challenges, but has he truly taken responsibility for the consequences? Has he acknowledged the harm caused to investors, employees, and stakeholders who trusted him?" The lawyer's voice rose slightly, emphasizing key points as they went on. "He talks about innovation and progress, but at what cost? When does boldness become recklessness? We're not asking you to deny the importance of dreaming big. We're asking you to recognize that dreams must be built on a foundation of honesty and fairness." The words hung heavy in the air, resonating with some members of the audience while others exchanged skeptical glances. Opposing counsel concluded their argument with a plea for justice, urging the jury to hold Musk accountable for what they framed as repeated failures of leadership. When it came time for Musk's legal team to present their closing statement, all eyes turned to him once again. His lawyer stood up, ready to deliver a powerful rebuttal, but Musk signaled subtly for them to step aside. Without hesitation, he rose from his seat and approached the podium himself. The room fell silent, every person leaning forward slightly, captivated by the sight of one of the world's most polarizing figures stepping directly into the spotlight one last time. Musk began softly, almost conversationally, as though speaking to friends rather than a packed courtroom. "Over the past few days, you've heard a lot about me. Some truths, some exaggerations, and some outright misunderstandings. But let me remind you of something. This isn't just about me. It's about the thousands of people who work tirelessly alongside me to build a better future. It's about the engineers, the designers, the factory workers, and the dreamers who believe in the power of innovation to change lives." His voice grew stronger as he continued, weaving together threads of logic and emotion. "Yes, we take risks. Yes, we face setbacks, but those aren't signs of failure, they're signs of growth. Every challenge we encounter teaches us how to do better next time. Every mistake forces us to rethink, adapt, and improve. If I've learned anything in my life, it's that progress doesn't come from playing it safe. It comes from daring to imagine what others say is impossible, and then proving them wrong. Musk paused, allowing his words to settle over the room. Then, with quiet determination, he addressed the accusations head-on. You've been told that I misled people, that I prioritized ambition over ethics, that I failed to take responsibility for my actions. But look at the facts. Not the headlines, not the opinions, but the evidence presented here. Look at the projects completed, the milestones achieved, the lives impacted. Does that sound like someone who doesn't care? Or does it sound like someone who cares so deeply that they refuse to give up, even when the odds seem insurmountable? As he spoke, Musk's tone shifted from defensive to reflective, inviting the jury to consider the bigger picture. We live in a world full of problems: climate change, energy shortages, transportation inefficiencies. These aren't abstract issues. They affect real people every single day. And yet, instead of tackling these challenges head-on, many choose to criticize those who try. Why? Because trying means risking failure. Trying means stepping outside your comfort zone. Trying means believing that the future can be better than the present, even if it's hard to see how. By the time he finished, there was a collective exhale from the room, as though everyone had been holding their breath. Musk stepped back from the podium, nodding briefly to the judge before returning to his seat. His expression remained calm, but there was a flicker of emotion in his eyes, a mixture of hope and resolve, as he glanced toward the jury. The judge then delivered final instructions to the jurors, reminding them of their duty to weigh the evidence impartially and reach a verdict based solely on the facts presented. As the jury filed out of the courtroom to begin deliberations, the atmosphere shifted once again. Reporters rushed outside to file updates. Spectators lingered in hushed conversations, and Musk's legal team gathered quietly to discuss what might come next. For Musk himself, there was little left to do but wait. Hours passed, stretching into what felt like an eternity. Inside the deliberation room, jurors debated passionately, wrestling with the complexities of the case and the weight of their decision. Outside, crowds gathered around televisions broadcasting live updates, anxiously awaiting news of the outcome. Social media buzzed with speculation, hashtags trending as people around the world weighed in on what the verdict might mean for Musk, his companies, and the broader narrative of innovation versus regulation. Finally, after nearly 6 hours, the jury returned to the courtroom. The judge called the session back to order, and all eyes turned to the foreperson as they stood to deliver the verdict. The room was so quiet that the faint hum of the air conditioning seemed deafening. One by one, the charges were read aloud, followed by the jury's decision on each count. To the surprise of many, including Musk himself, the verdict leaned heavily in his favor. While not entirely absolved, he was cleared of the most serious allegations, with the jury acknowledging that his actions, though risky, were driven by genuine intent and backed by substantial effort. As the judge dismissed, the court applause broke out among Musk's supporters, quickly muffled by stern looks from bailiffs. Outside, reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, and social media erupted with reactions ranging from jubilation to disbelief. For Musk, however, the victory was bittersweet. He knew the scrutiny wouldn't end here. There would always be critics, doubters, and new battles to fight. But as he walked away from the courthouse surrounded by flashes of light, he allowed himself a small smile. This trial hadn't just been about defending his reputation. It had been about reaffirming his principles. It had shown the world that innovation requires resilience, that progress demands accountability, and that true leadership isn't about avoiding failure. It's about embracing it and using it to move forward. As he climbed into his car and drove off, the crowd still buzzing behind him, Musk knew one thing for certain. No matter what challenges lay ahead, he would continue pushing boundaries, breaking rules, and striving to create a future worth fighting for.